Hello, my dear students from the model Developmental Psychology tool. Welcome to the session number 8. This is the list of the vocabulary that I prepared for you today. So I hope that you can study these words, and on the class, if you have some doubts, you can ask me. In today's class, we will continue to talk about adulthood. As I told you, we are discussing together about early adulthood and middle adulthood. And there are two areas or domains of development that we are talking today. First, about adults' perceptual and motor development, and also about adults' cognitive development. When we talk about adults' perceptual and motor development, one aspect that is really important is about health and wellness. And the most important idea is indeed that it is around 20 years old that we reach the peak of our physical fitness and our senses. Indeed, most of you should be exactly more or less in the peak of your physical perceptual resources. After this peak, this means that there is a process of deterioration that will start. This process is progressive. We cannot see immediately that people cannot see or cannot listen or doesn't have the muscles, the same muscle strength. We cannot see it from one day to another. This is a progressive process that we can observe in this graph, something that will start around 20, as you can see here. This starts around 20, and it will be clearly observable around 40 years old that the resources that we have are not exactly the same in terms of senses and physical fitness. So indeed, this is to highlight that yes, most of you, take advantage of your moment now because you are in the peak of your age. And this process of that you are talking about, in which we have a physical decline with age, it is called aging. Yep, so aging is the process related to the decline, to lose abilities or skills with age. And we can talk about two main types of aging: primary and secondary. The primary aging is also called senescence, and this is the process of physical decline that occurs to everybody in the same way. That is only related to maturation, time, and biological factors. So everybody will get old, and this is a normative and expected process. But we also can talk about secondary aging, and this secondary aging is that one that is related with environmental influences. For instance, poor health habits, diseases. For instance, smoking, drinking alcohol, doesn't have physical exercise. So indeed, we all will get old. We all will have a decline in our physical abilities and skills with age. And this process is called senescence. But this process of aging is different according to environmental factors according to our habits and what we do in our life. And as I told you, physical exercise is one essential aspect in the process of aging. And the World Health Organization clearly states that adults should have at least 30 minutes each day of physical activity, moderate physical activity. So this is something that we should do in all our adult life, to keep an active life and do moderate physical exercise at least 30 minutes a day. And there are many benefits of regular exercise, as you can imagine, but uh, I'd like two aspects. First one, the decrease in stress and anxiety. Uh, Physical exercise, indeed, is correlated with good mental health, including reducing the levels of depression. So this is a basic thing. People should do physical exercise. And even when we are working as a counselors, to prescribe physical exercise, it will be important for people with anxiety and depression disorders. Besides that, physical exercise is associated with increased longevity. That means that people who does regular physical exercise, they live longer. So besides all the other benefits, these two clearly justify that even us as psychologists could and should recommend people to perform physical exercise. Here in this slide, you have many other a list another organization of these benefits, and here at the end we have the psychological benefits. Um, it's interesting to know that between 20 to 30 years old, this is a period of life in which there is a higher risk for accidents, mainly with automobiles. Indeed, the studies are showing that when there are accidents, most of people are in this age. Uh, and it's also true that around 35 years old, it's only at 35 that illness and diseases will overtake accidents as the leading cause of death. So between 20 to 30, there is an higher risk of accidents, and this is also the most important cause of death of people in that age. This is also because people take more risks in this period, and it's also because people just learn how to drive, and it's the moment in which they take more risks and the probability for accidents is higher. So it's a very important to be attentive to this, that when we have death between 20 and 30 years old, the most important reason will be accidents with car accidents. So it's important to help people to be aware and attentive to this. There are also many different determinants of health that will contribute for people to have better health and better quality of life. But as most of the dimensions of many different dimensions of development, socioeconomic status has a very important contribution for health. The studies are showing that aspects like level of education, the income of the family will affect many dimensions like in health of people. And that is also related, of course, with healthcare systems, because to live in places with better healthcare system will also be related to health. Of course, that this also means that uh, people with more money, they also can have access to better medical services. That's why these two dimensions are also correlated. Because even though you are in a place without good medical services, if you get good resources, you can have it. So socioeconomic status and the healthcare system, they contribute to 75% of the health of human beings. So this is very related to policy, because as we can see, only around 15% is related to genetics. One important aspect of health in adults is obesity. And indeed, to have a good nutrition, to have proper food, and I don't know exactly what is that. We would require to have someone from this area of nutrition to help us. But indeed, to have a good nutrition is also important for health and well-being. And there are studies showing that 1/3 of adults in the United States are obese. I don't know exactly the percentage of people who are obese in Macau or in China, but you can find one obesity atlas. And it seems that at least in our region, we are not one of the most severe places. But indeed, we need to be attentive because obesity might be a very serious health problem, and you as a psychologist, you can and might have to work with people because of that. These are the most important aspects that I would like to highlight and to discuss with you about physical development. Let's make a brief summary. First, that the process of aging is natural. It happens to everybody. That we reach the peak of our physical and sensorial skills around 20 years old. After that, we start to have a progressive and slow decline that will be visible around 40 years old when we have the transition to middle adulthood, and that there is a primary process of aging and a secondary process of aging. This secondary process of aging is related to our habits and what we do in our life, and one important aspect of this is physical activity. And indeed, there are many benefits of having regular physical activity, and the World Health Organization requires or recommends 30 minutes of moderate activity a day. These are the main ideas. When we talk about cognitive development, and this is the second area that I'd like to talk, we always talk about Jean Piaget. In the last model, last year, we talked about the stages of cognitive development according to the theory of Piaget. And we talked about all these periods: sensory motor stage, pre-operational stage, concrete operational stage, and more recently, already in this model, we talked about the formal operations. According to the ideas and the studies of Piaget, the cognitive development of human beings will finish in adolescence with the formal operations. These formal operations will be, for Piaget, the last stage of cognitive development. However, there are some other, other authors that they talk about what they call post-formal thought. If Piaget talked about the formal thought or stage of formal operations, there are authors who say that yes, we reach that stage in adolescence, but there are specific characteristics of the cognition or way of thinking or reasoning of adults that are not in adolescence that make it appropriate to talk about a post-formal thought. So, in order to discuss and to talk about what is this post-formal thought, I would like you to do the task number 16. You have here a very concrete and specific situation of everyday life, and I want you to do this assignment to tell me what you think about Tyra should do about the behavior of her husband. And on Monday we will discuss about these, your answers, and to discuss based on this what is the post-formal thought. And according to authors that we will discuss later, post-formal thought might have three main characteristics. The first one will be relativism. I don't know if you remember, but we already talked about relativism when we talked about moral development for Kohlberg. You remember, he told about one period of relativism of law. And relativism will be exactly one of the characteristics of the post-formal thought, the type of thinking that adults do and adolescents don't do that much. The other characteristic will be what is called dialectic operations or dialectic thinking. And finally, reflective thinking or reflective judgment. Now, let's talk a little bit about each of these dimensions. Relativism is the idea that many of the things in our life cannot be described in a black and white way. It's not just a true or false. And it was this lady, Giselle Labouvier, who highlighted the importance of integrating emotions in cognition, something that adults do, in a way that the adults integrating their emotions in the way they think, they start not to think only in a black or white, but more in different shades of gray. People, adults, will start to consider more possibilities and not just yes or no, black or white. This relativism is related with the integration and taking into account the real life concerns. People, adults, with their own practical experience. They have experience, they experience different things in their lives, and now they integrate that experience. They integrate those real life concerns in their way of thinking, and it's not just a logic way. It's not just we don't think only logically. We think also take into account our experience, what happens, and taking into account that we might find exceptions for different situations, taking into account what happens in real life. And indeed, this is called integrating motion and our experience in the process of thinking. Besides relativism, another aspect that was introduced by Hegel in 1973, when he talked about a mature cognition, so one of the characteristics of this post-formal thought is the ability to include and to accept paradox and uncertainty. Indeed, it's shown more recently by Basek's 2005 that people, adults, one of the characteristics of adult thinking is the ability, or more than ability, the appreciation to debate, to discuss, and to accept that there are different ideas, and sometimes that we have to deal with contradictions. Indeed, it is possible to love and to hate at the same time. Indeed, it is possible that something might be good or might be bad at the same time. And this ability of integrating and deal with these paradox, contradictions, and to find solutions for these contradictions is what we call dialectical thinking. And this, as you can imagine, this involves discussion, debate, and this is something that the adults can do or are expected to do. This is also related to what we call reflective judgment. With reflective judgment, we assume that when we deal with these contradictions, we assume that there are different perspectives and there are issues that are really controversial and that there might exist different points of view based on the beliefs, experiences of people. And indeed, that we cannot only be based on logic, formal logic, like being one of the main characteristics of the formal thought of adolescence. We don't think more about logic, but we think more based also on beliefs, my own opinion and perspective, and we assume that we might have different opinions and perspectives. This is reflective judgment, and as you can imagine, that's why this reflective judgment is something that we really appreciate in university students. That's why I'm always asking you to give your opinions about the different topics, because we assume in a post-formal thought, in a thought of adults, that there are different ways of thinking about reality. There are different perspectives, and what is important is that we find justification in evidence to what we are saying. Based on this, there was an author, and we'll see later, that who created an instrument, a procedure to evaluate reflective judgment in adults. And I took some of the, and this procedure to evaluate reflective judgment is based on the answer to questions, to controversial questions. What I would like you to do now in task 17 is exactly to answer to two of this situation, following to answering to the questions. The first situation, and I put here the picture of this gentleman that I think you all know, and it's about the facts and this idea of the fake news that we are all listening this gentleman talking about. So there is this first problem. Please read this problem related to news, the reality, and the possibility or not of describing facts in a very clear way, and tell me what do you think about it. And there is also a problem too related to counseling and prescription of medicine for some of psychological problems. And I would like you to tell me what you think about this. Do you think that the use of drugs will be appropriate or not? What do you think about that? When you answer to this, try to answer to these 7 questions to each situation, because these are exactly the answers that are included in this reflective judgment interview. I put here because this is an open source instrument and you can try to use with your adults when you will be doing your work. You can use this instrument. This is a semi-structured interview with many topics, many themes, in which you just ask these questions, and based on the analysis of the answers, you can define the level of reflective reasoning of or thinking in uh, 3 levels or 7 stages: the pre-reflective reasoning, the quasi-reflective reasoning, and stages 6 and 7, in which indeed there is already a reflective reasoning installed. So please try to answer to those questions, and then let's think a little bit about the level of reflective reasoning that you use in your answers. Uh, as I told you, one common aspect of this post-formal thought is the inclusion of life events and cognitive development. Indeed, uh, the moment you are having more experiences in life, the moment we are dealing with different situations, and sometimes we found ourselves in situations that we never imagined that we could be. For instance, now pandemics with a COVID-19 that obliges us to many uh, to many difficulties and to do things that we thought that maybe we would never do. Uh, that makes us thinking in a different way. Indeed, the point is now with adult life, we start to take into account our experience, the ups and downs of our life, to when we think, when we make reasoning. And now it's not just logic. Now it's also about my feelings, my experience, and what I did. And these life events, of course, will be really, really important. Another important dimension of cognitive development in adulthood is the course or evolution of intelligence. And as we all have also this idea that there should be a decline uh, in of intelligence in adulthood. And indeed, when we use intelligence measures, both in longitudinal studies or in cross-sectional studies. Longitudinal studies, as you know, is when we are evaluating the same participants through time. We can see that the decline of the measures of intelligence is particularly relevant around 60 to 65. That more or less this moment is when we observe a bigger decline on the intelligence performance of adults during this period. However, this is not absolute. You know, when we think about the decline of intelligence, we need to distinguish 2 types of intelligence. We need to distinguish what we call the fluid intelligence from what is called the crystallized intelligence. When we talk about fluid intelligence, this is related to all the information related to processing capabilities like reasoning, memory, these specific intelligence dimensions that are related to biological processes and not that related to experience. When we talk about crystallized intelligence, we are more talking about accumulation of information, those skills, strategies that we acquire in life through experience and while we are trying to solve problems and situations in our life. So the fluid intelligence might be more biological, more related to maturation and processes that we cannot control, and the crystallized intelligence would be more related with experience, the environment, and if we are keeping or not our minds functioning. And indeed, the studies are showing very, very interesting data. The studies are showing that this more biological dimension of intelligence, the fluid intelligence, indeed, after middle adulthood, after 40, 45 years old, there is a clear decline. Indeed, all this maturation process, like memory, uh, time of reaction, uh, and other aspects of intelligence that are more related to biological processes, those will start to decline. But on the other hand, the crystallized intelligence, that is related to experience, stimulation, and to have a rich life and very active life in terms of cognitive challenges, that will continue increasing. Indeed, this is very important evidence showing that we can and we should continue to learn through all our life. Human beings can learn in all the cycle of life, and this crystallized intelligence can always be progressing in a positive way. And one very important concept related to cognitive development in adulthood is what we call expertise. And indeed, to become an expert in something is, is requires experience, requires years of life doing the same thing in a way that we become really experts, really good on that, in a way that we can do those things in a very automatic way, quick way, without having to think about everything. Indeed, it's really interesting because I can think about when I was an intern, when I did my internship of my after my Bachelor of Psychology. And I clearly remember that before any session with my clients, I used to do a plan of the session, to study a lot and to read, to prepare every little thing that I would do. I clearly remember that after the sessions, I would do long reports, writing and thinking about everything to try to understand and to understand the meaning. But indeed, with experience, with practice, this process started to be much more simple and easier for me. At some point, I can clearly, fast understand what is happening with this person. I can understand what means what this person said. Because not because I'm clever than you that will be interns, but because I have experience, because I have practice doing the same thing, so I became an expert. And indeed, this capacity that people acquires with time and in life is very, very important. That's why it is important for human resources to value the expertise of those elderly people because they might take longer to do some assignments. Maybe they are not that fast anymore, but the expertise, the experience that they have is very, very valuable. And it's important to value that in many different dimensions. And indeed, in this table, we can see the difference of the performance between beginners. As I told you, they use they use procedures and rules and try to follow strictly because they are not secure, they don't have experience, and it's expected that they follow orders and scripts, what people told me how to do. And indeed, when in 2 years you will do your internship, it's expected that you do the way they taught. Someone will tell you, hey, you need to follow this form, you need to write these notes in this format, you need to do things this way because you are a beginner. But when we become experts in something, things will happen naturally. And more than to happen naturally, we become more flexible in the way we do things, and we can also easily deal with the what was not expected to happen because we already have experience other things that happens, that when something unexpected happens, we can deal better with this situation. So it's really important for us to value, in terms of cognitive development, expertise. People might not be that young, people might not be that fast, but this expertise that comes with experience and practice is really, really valuable. One of these aspects of fluid memory that indeed will have a decline is related of cognition that is declining is memory. Um, uh, Mostly long-term memory that declines with age for some people. It's really, really interesting that sometimes you are, what you will see later, that when we are working with elderly, it seems that they can recall easily information from very long time ago, but not what they did yesterday. And indeed, what happens is that uh, when with time, after middle adulthood, indeed, people start to be less efficient in storing and retrieving information that was stored. Well, I have to confess, I'm already experiencing this. I already feel these limitations in my memory. That's why now I use more my agenda and notes for me not to forget the things. So to lose some memory skills is not that bad if we can find strategies to overcome that and to adapt. Again, do you remember last week about family? I told about the importance of adaptation. And indeed, it's important that we adapt. For me, Google Calendar, it's amazing. I don't forget things. I have the Google Calendar with all my assignments, and I have the Google Tasks in which I put the things that I need to do. And I create this system for me to store the information that is really important. So I continue to be functional, and that doesn't affect my life. But indeed, I know that if I would not do that, I will forget things. And that didn't happen when I was 20 or 30 years old. I wouldn't care. I didn't have an agenda. Everything was always in my mind, really available. Well, as you can see in this picture, to have uh, strategies to memorize, even the elephants, it seems that they use it. So the problem itself is not the change, is not the fact that there is a decline in our resources. The problem that would be or would exist if it would be if we wouldn't have the ability to adapt to our new reality and our new situation. So again, adaptation is very important for human beings in development. As we told and we already discussed, development is a process. We are always in a process of change. And if we are changing, we need also to adapt to the new reality of our cognition, our body. Of course, that I know that this moment I cannot run the way I used to run. When I will go to play football or basketball with my friends, I cannot play the same way. But I continue going, but I accept and I adapt the way I play in order to feel comfortable with that. So I would like to finish this aspect related to physical development and cognitive development, in which clearly with the process of aging, there is a decline of resources, showing that this is not a terrible thing, as long as people will have the ability to adapt. And with this, I will finish my class. I will see you on Monday. Meanwhile, please enjoy the rest of your week and have a very, very wonderful weekend. Bye bye, my dear students.